So starting with the graph of a basic function, graph the following using techniques of shifting, compressing, stretching, reflecting. Find the domain and range of the function. So if we see the function g of x equals x squared minus 6, we should be able to see that the parent function is actually going to be y equals x squared. So remember, y equals x squared is the U-shaped graph for the parabola. So as far as some critical points go, if we have negative one goes in squared, and that gives me a 1. 0 goes in, 0 squared is 0, and 1 squared would give me 1. So negative 1, 1, 0, 0. Now, what happens is if we have this f of x is my function, notice how the minus 6 is actually on the outside of it. So since it's on the outside, this means this is going to be a vertical shift. And a vertical shift, you just do what it says. So this is going to go down by 6. So what happens is if I want to graph my new function, so if I want to graph y equals x squared minus 6, all I got to do is recognize that the x values are not changing. The negative 1, the 0, and the 1 are not changing. Only the y values are changing. So if I subtract 6 from the 1, that would give me a negative 5. If I subtract a 6 from a 0, that gives me a negative 6. And if I subtract a 6 from a 1, that's going to give me a negative 5. So that should be my new ordered pairs. So if I was on the graphing calculator, if I graph y equals x squared, the parent function, then if I graph x squared minus 6, if we graph those two, notice that the parent function is right there at the origin. But notice how the function basically is the same opening, but the 0, 0 is now at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 6. The 1, 1 was actually now going to be at 1, negative 5. It's going to be that area. And then the negative 1, 1 is now going to be at negative 1, 5. So those 3 points have actually been dropped down here to create a sketch of the graph. So for us, though, they want us to use the graphing tool to graph it. So the only thing that really is affected is the shift. So the compressions stay the same. The 1 and the 1 for the horizontal and the vertical stay the same. Instead of being a 0 here, we need to actually make this turn into a negative 6. So we need to move the bar to a negative 6 to make the graph shift. And then there's not a horizontal shift here, and there's not any reflections about the x or y axis. So those also can remain blank. So one thing we're really affecting is the vertical shift. So when you graph it, after you type in, once you use the correct graphing tool, which again, you're using the curved graphing tool, if you complete this information here, it should complete the graph for you without you having to really plot any points. So if you just recognize this is the graphing tool and fill this information out, it'll complete the graph as we see over here. You should see a point at 0, negative 6. You should see a point at 1, negative 5. You should see a point at negative 1, 5, and that'd be a rough look of it all. It's going to kind of have this symmetry with respect to the y-axis, since it was not moved left or right. Since it just got moved up or down, there's still the symmetry with respect to the y-axis. The y-axis kind of cuts it in half. So yeah, that's our graphing tool that we'll have to use. And the only thing we're really changing is the vertical shift of down 6. So if I look at the actual graph, notice that the range, domain and range are what they're asking for. And again, they're asking for interval notation. Remember, domain, it's always a set of real numbers unless we're dividing by 0 or if there's a square root present. So there's not any domain restrictions. So the domain is again going to be from left bound is negative infinity to the right bound, which is positive infinity. So there's not any domain restriction. So it's all real numbers. On the other hand, notice that the range value, since it's a parabola, there is a minimum, or in this case, an absolute minimum at negative 6. And then notice how the graph does go up. So there is a lower bound restriction, the -6, and then there's not an upper bound restriction. It goes to infinity, and that's open into there. So that would be your range. The lowest it goes is down to -6 now because of the vertical shift. Notice that the original graph, the range would have been 0 or higher, but now it's -6 and higher. Okay.